Hello, fans, and welcome back to the channel. It's Global Affairs with Greg Ayers. And today we're starting a series of productions on the United States intelligence community. Today, we're specifically going to be looking at the 2016 attempted coup in Turkey, a failed coup in and of itself, but we're looking at it from the perspective of the United States intelligence community and how and why the United States IC failed to pick up on the underlying rumblings for this coup attempt and then failed it in our subsequent reaction. So we're going to start off by taking a look at a timeline of the coup's progression, or attempted coup's progression, you might say, as it ultimately failed. We'll notice that the times here are in Grand Meridian time. This is actually 3 hours ahead of local time in Istanbul, Turkey. And we can note that the coup started earlier than it was originally intended. Word got out from the coup plotters to intelligence sources in Russia, and it leaked to insiders within President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's cabinet. And the coup plotters, instead of deciding to cancel the coup, went ahead with an early start date, while a lot of civilians were still out available on the streets. We can see that shortly after the coup starts, the Turkish prime minister announces that military activity is underway. We see that the chief of staff is taken hostage, and President Erdogan has to react quickly in order to make a public appearance. He makes a Facebook Live post and begins to call for public support to quash the coup. But from the United States intelligence perspective, we're going to look to see why the United States didn't learn about this earlier, the failures that were made, and look at some possible ramifications. So some of our key judgments, our basic line up front, is that diplomatic relations suffered greatly as the United States intelligence community failed to foresee the coup attempt and underestimated Turkish President Recep Erdogan's reaction towards Fethullah Gulen. Fethullah Gulen is a Muslim cleric who was at the time residing in Pennsylvania and does to this day. And this is a gentleman who used to be closely aligned with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but they've since grown apart in their relationship. And Erdogan places the majority of the blame for this coup on Fethullah Gulen, and then continues to shift and expand that blame onto the United States. But the United States' failure to see this coup and failure to see the impact of hosting Fethullah Gulen, it's going to cause a long-term deterioration in relations between the two. And this is a major blow, as Turkey is the southernmost member of NATO and a large strategic partner, particularly at the time when the large-scale fight against ISIS was still continuing off Turkey's southern border in Syria. And we're going to see a change in the relationship, or an attempted change in the relationship, between President Obama and Erdogan and President Donald Trump and Erdogan. When we have to look at who failed, we see the entire intelligence community up here on the top right, 14 total agencies. But the blame for this intelligence failure lies largely with just 3 agencies: the Department of State, the DIA, and the Central Intelligence Agency. From the Department of State perspective, they failed to foresee the coup attempt. This is a country the United States has strong diplomatic ties to, and they failed to foresee Erdogan's diplomatic reaction. Fethullah Gulen was someone that the United States had under their radar, but we failed to see how strong the animosity and how strong the suspicion was between Erdogan and Gulen, as this may have changed the United States' initial response under the Obama administration, where they called for more and more evidence before making a decision. Ultimately, no decision to extradite or hand over Gulen was made. From the DIA's perspective, we see a failure to judge the opinions and standings of senior Turkish military leadership. So the thinking at the outset of the coup was, particularly by Erdogan, was that this coup attempt was going to be led and plotted and planned by Fethullah Gulen. But in the aftermath, we discovered that Gulen is a primary motivator for this coup, but not the orchestrator of the coup, and an important distinction to make. So this coup is plotted and executed by senior members of Turkey's military leadership, people who idolize Gulen and support the Gulenist movement, but Gulen himself was not the primary orchestrator. So the DIA, due to the strong military ties to the United States and Turkey, a fellow NATO member, we should have understood the discontent that exists within senior ranks of the Turkish military, particularly the Turkish Air Force. And the Central Intelligence Agency also experienced some unit failures. It could be professed that they failed to assess Erdogan's personal reaction to the coup. We couldn't see how personally upset, how personally paranoid he was going to come out of this coup, and the amount of blame that he was going to shift towards Gulen. So we see a number of unit failures across the United States IC, things that will need to be addressed if the United States is going to be more proficient with our UMIT and more proficient in our diplomatic relations moving forward, not just with Turkey, but throughout Europe and throughout our diplomacy globally. So some of IC biases lead to these failures. We had some historical biases, fundamental attribution biases, and confirmation biases. One of the primary ones being a historical bias. So Turkey being a longstanding NATO ally, the assumption was that the relationship would continue. It experienced some rocks in the road, particularly over United States participation actions in Iraq in 2003, with flyover spaces, things of that sort, and with priorities on the fight against ISIS, with Turkey seeing that primarily as a difficulty with the Kurdish population, the PKK. The United States far more focused on the Islamic State or Daesh. And the historical perspective would have said that Gulen would have been the primary coup plotter, a gentleman here in Pennsylvania some of the United States could have kept their eyes on, but it turns out that even if we'd been watching Gulen, he wasn't the primary plotter or orchestrator of the coup, so that wouldn't have been the end all be all for solving that intelligence failure. We have, again, those fundamental attribution biases. We thought that protecting Gulen, doing the right thing, would lead to the right outcome. While it may have been the right thing from a jurisprudence standpoint, from a human rights standpoint, it ended up being tragic for our relationship therein. The same can be said for standing up for the Kurds. This may have been the right thing from a human rights perspective, from an ethical perspective, but seriously deteriorated our relationship with Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, who simply sees that matter differently, has a different set of priorities. They're something we're not going to judge at this time. And we can see how strongly Erdogan felt about this coup attempt and how much he blamed the United States, how much he was willing to place the blame on Fethullah Gulen. We can see here, even in 2021, 5 years after the coup, just 1 year ago, Erdogan is going after Gulen's family members, particularly his nephew here, who's extracted from Kenya. Moving forward, we can look at some of the policy changes. So one of the primary differences we see as this coup attempt happens in 2016, we have the Trump administration coming in 2017, and Erdogan has clear set priorities. He wants Fethullah Gulen returned to Turkey to stand trial, and what would probably be a relatively short trial, given the growing authoritarianism within Turkish courts. But the Trump administration seeks to move past kind of the delaying and stalling tactics put forth by the Obama administration, coming in the later days of the Obama administration. The Trump administration tries to reconcile and improve relations with Turkey, and this reconciliation attempt is primarily executed by NSA or National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, former Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and in what is still under investigation to this day, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn proposes the concept of extraditing Fethullah Gulen for a set price. This is something that CIA Director James Woolsey takes enormous objection to, and it leads to the ousting of that story, which leads to the subsequent firing of Lieutenant General National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. And thereafter, the relationship deteriorates further. CAATSA, Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, is placed on Turkey, and Turkey's kicked out of the F-35 program after they side with Russia in the purchase of the S-400 missile defense system. So despite the Trump administration's early attempt at reconciliation, the relationship simply deteriorates further, and it all stems back from that original unit failure, which might have avoided some of these deteriorations in the first place. Not to say that they can entirely prevent that, but we're dealing with some historical hypotheticals which may have improved those instances in the first place. And we do need to look at why this could be seen as a failure, not just from a human perspective, but from a diplomatic perspective. You know, Turkey's history of coup attempts, we should have had a greater eye on this matter from an intelligence community perspective. Due to our strong military ties, as I said, particularly with the DIA, we should have had our thumb on the pulse of Turkish military leadership from the outset. And simply relying on the Turkish military was going to prove to be futile in that sense. So the Turkish military is unable to surveil their officer corps off base or off duty, which is where a lot of this coup plotting activities took place. Also, we can look at the professed knowledge that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn had. He purportedly had information of this coup attempt happening in advance. We can't verify that information to this date, but we do know that the Russians had advanced knowledge of this coup. So if the Russians had advanced knowledge, the United States, with a larger intelligence community presence and dealing with a long-standing historical ally, should have had the type of contacts, type of sources that would have given us advanced knowledge of that coup as well. Also, we failed to imagine the impact of Gulen's, that's again that human failure on Erdogan's position or standing on the likely culprits. And it's a failure from the longstanding deterioration of relations with a strategic ally. And we can see that kind of played out in this bottom chart here as foreign direct investment in Turkey significantly declines after that high watermark in 2015. It's downhill from the 2016 coup thereafter, denominated in billions of US dollars. And finally, what sort of policy changes could be made to save this relationship? Well, is it too far gone? We do have to consider the situation on the ground, the situation geopolitically has changed. One of the primary things that held the relationship together was the campaign to defeat ISIS, which is since largely ended. Turkish military independence is largely now secured. They're moving further and further away from the United States. It can be hard to get that relationship back. And after Erdogan's purges of academia, law enforcement, military ranks, and some of the internal autocratic actions there, it's going to be harder and harder for the United States to repair a relationship with the Turkish state or with their leader Tayyip Erdogan. But we can look at fixing some of the internal biases, what methods could be done to improve our unit collection capabilities, not relying on the Turkish military to self-report on the internal leanings of their senior officer corps, trying to establish some more diversity of opinion to get rid of some of those fundamental attribution biases. And we really need to focus on planning for the next event. As I stated previously, if we'd focused on tackling coup attempts or coup plots in the previous manner that occurred in Turkey, we would have missed this one, as Fethullah Gulen was not the primary plotter. So we need to look at fighting the next potential intelligence failure as opposed to the previous. All that being said, I hope you enjoyed our presentation today. For more interesting content, to stay tuned with Global Affairs. Keep your attention posted. Global Affairs with Greg Ayres, YouTube, WordPress. Stay tuned for more. That's all we have for today.